You should be grateful we even let your kind work indoors instead of cleaning streets." Those cutting words, dripping with venom, were hissed at Nora Whitman, a black teenage waitress just trying to get through her after-school shift at a small-town diner. The speaker was a woman with all the self-importance of a ruthless hoe queen, but the situation soon escalated from verbal abuse to physical violence. At the Queen's unspoken command, a privileged bully, fueled by entitlement, slammed his fist into Nora's stomach and smashed her face against the unforgiving countertop. Her only offense? Refusing to kowtow to those who held all the power in their hands. They believed that such blatant humiliation would crush her spirit, but they were fatally mistaken. At that very moment, as if summoned by fate, the diner door swung open and 20 imposing Hell's Angels strode in, ready to deliver their own brand of street justice to these privileged tormentors. Will the truth be enough to save her? Or will the next blow come from a source she least expects? Subscribe now and stay tuned until the very last second, because in this story, the reckoning for hate is only just beginning. Daisy's diner exhaled the weary sigh of a slow afternoon. The booths sat empty, the blinds were drawn halfway, and the air hung heavy with the lingering scent of grease and long-gone coffee. At the far end of the room, Nora Whitman moved through the silence like a shadow that refused to be broken. Her apron, though clean, was frayed at the edges, and her notepad was well worn. A quiet determination shone in her tired brown eyes, a resilience forged from countless hours spent balancing homework, paychecks, dreams, and the unforgiving diner floor. The bell above the door rattled sharply, announcing an arrival that made Nora's spine instinctively straighten. Ethan Cole walked in, bringing with him an icy chill that seemed to drain the warmth from the room. His varsity jacket was zipped just enough to reveal the school crest of St. Mark's, a symbol of old money and untouchable privilege. His face, all chiseled jawline and entitled smirk, looked as if it had been sculpted directly from the town's self-satisfied banners. Two other students, both white and smirking, trailed in behind him. Owen Brooks didn't even bother glancing at the laminated menus or the other waitress, a woman in her 50s who was folding napkins by the counter. His gaze locked onto Nora Whitman with laser-like precision. "Table for 3, he announced loud enough for everyone to hear, then added with a sneer, "Only if we get her." The other waitress, familiar with this twisted game, pretended not to notice. Nora Whitman took a steadying breath and stepped forward, her notepad trembling for a heartbeat before settling in her hand. "Good afternoon, can I take your order?" He didn't bother to look at her. "Not really," Harland mused, dragging his eyes across the menu with feigned interest. "What do you recommend, Nora?" He twisted her name, making it sound like a foreign word he'd scraped off the bottom of his shoe. She answered, her voice calm and measured. "Most people come in for the chili or the patty melt. Both are fresh today." He snorted derisively. "Do I look like most people to you?" A slow, ugly smile spread across his face as he leaned back, spreading out in the booth as if he owned the place. "You know what? Just bring me a burger. No, make that a Reuben. No, wait. Is your soup even edible today?" His friends laughed obsequiously. Nora's pen hovered above her pad. "Reuben and soup, then?" Jason Reed shrugged, his eyes glinting with malice. "I'll think about it. We don't want her bringing the wrong thing, do we?" He said this to his friends, but pitched his voice so that the entire diner could hear. Can't trust someone who sits in the back row at school and still manages to mess up a glass of water. He continued, turning now to the man at the counter. "Did you know she's in my class? Never gets invited to parties, always got her nose in a book. Guess that's why she's here, hustling for tips. While some of us," he patted his jacket and flashed a car key, "just got a brand new ride from Dad." The waitress at the counter shot Nora a look filled with sympathy, but also helplessness. In small-town America, some fights are never fair. Nora Whitman's jaw tightened. She had learned to let the words roll off, but every syllable felt like a knife dragged along old scars. She wrote the order quietly, never meeting his eyes. "Anything to drink?" Miles Carter grinned, clearly enjoying himself. "Tap water, or is that too much for you?" His friends tittered again. He turned, his eyes bright with malice, and called out for the room to hear, "Make sure she washes her hands this time, guys. Never know what you'll get otherwise." Nora Whitman's grip on her pen turned white-knuckle tight. She did not answer. She would not. As she walked toward the kitchen, the whispers followed her like little riptides of pity and gossip. Lucas Miller leaned back, surveying the diner, then flicked his fingers in a sharp, snapping motion meant to slice through her dignity. "Hey!" Ethan Cole called out, his voice hard and sudden. He snapped his fingers again right at her face, the gesture unmistakable, an order, a summons. "I'm speaking English here, you understand? Or should I start using the kind of slang you're used to from the projects?" A hush fell across the diner. The cook froze, a fork full of onions suspended in mid-air. Even the old man in the corner, the one who always read his newspaper with quiet reverence, lowered his paper. Nora Whitman stopped for just a moment. Her knuckles tightened on the pen, and for one breath she wanted to turn, to let all the words she'd swallowed burn their way out. But she drew in the silence, steady and deep. Not here. Not for him. She straightened her shoulders, her eyes fixed on the ticket window, refusing to give Ethan Cole the satisfaction of seeing her anger. Yet in his eyes a glint appeared. He saw her restraint not as strength, but as an invitation to push harder. He wasn't done yet, not by a long shot. The minutes crawled by, thick with tension, as Nora Whitman waited by the kitchen window for the orders to come up. Harlan's voice still echoed in her ears, each word sharp as broken glass. She pressed her palm to her chest, feeling her heart drum against the buttons of her apron. "Don't let them get to you," she told herself. "Not here, not again." The bell dinged. Soup, Reuben, fries. She slid the steaming plates onto a tray, checking each detail twice. As she approached Owen Brooks's table, his friends fell silent, the kind of silence charged with anticipation, a pack waiting for a show. Sophie Grant set the plates down with practiced care. Soup, Reuben, fries. She slid the silverware across the table, her hands steady, her face composed. Harlan didn't look at the food. He smirked, making sure everyone around could see his performance. "That's adorable, Nora. You act like this is some five-star place, not a greasy little pit stop. Did you spit in the soup? Is that what your kind does when you're jealous?" His friends snickered, their eyes darting to the counter, gauging if anyone was watching. Nora Whitman didn't flinch. She met Harlan's gaze, her tone measured. "I don't need to stoop that low. Good food stands on its own." Harlan leaned in, his smile curdling. "That's cute. You still think you're better than us, don't you? Still walking around like you've got something to prove." He picked up the bowl of spaghetti, swirling it theatrically. Then, without warning, he jerked his wrist, sending a gloppy cascade straight onto his pristine Jordan sneakers. The sauce splattered, red against blinding white. Ethan Cole shot out of the booth, his voice exploding through the diner. "What the hell is wrong with you?" he screamed, pointing directly at Nora Whitman. "Are you blind or just stupid?" Heads turned. Even the old man in the corner, Walter Hayes, lowered his newspaper, his blue eyes narrowing. Nora stood her ground. "You knocked it over." "I saw you," Harlan laughed, a raw, ugly sound. "Did everyone hear that?" he called, twisting to address the room. "Of course, she's blaming someone else. Always someone else's fault, right?" He turned back to Nora Whitman, towering over her now, forcing her back a step. "You ruined my shoes. You're going to pay for this." She stared at the ruined sneakers, then back at Ethan Cole. "I'll clean it up," she said, her voice tight. "Just let me get a towel." But Ethan Cole stepped closer, blocking her path. "No, I want you to get down and clean them now with your hands. Or maybe," he flashed a cold grin, "maybe you should lick them clean since you're so desperate for tips." His words sent a wave of discomfort through the diner. The cook looked up, his mouth set in a thin line. The other waitress reached for her phone but hesitated. No one moved. Nora Whitman's cheeks burned, but she refused to look away. "You want a show? You want to humiliate me in front of everyone?" She let her words slice through the air, clear and controlled. "You can ask, but I'm not your entertainment." Harlan's lips curled. "Oh, I'm not asking." He pressed a hand to her shoulder, trying to force her down. "Come on, Nora, get on your knees. You don't want to lose this job, do you? Or is waiting tables all you've got?" She shrugged off his hand, her voice steady as steel. "You don't get to decide what I have or what I'm worth. Not here, not anywhere." The cruelty in Owen Brooks's eyes twisted into something darker. He looked around, making sure everyone was watching. "You know what your problem is, Nora." His voice dropped to a harsh, venomous hiss. "You think you're special? You think you deserve what I've worked for my whole life, but you'll never be more than a copy. That A you got on the history paper, that was charity. They felt sorry for you, but me, I earned it." Nora Whitman drew a breath, feeling her hands start to shake. "You want to talk about earning things? Maybe if you put half as much effort into your work as you do into putting people down, you'd have something to be proud of." A gasp rippled through the diner. Even Harlan's friends looked uncertain now. But Harlan's face twisted, red blotches appearing on his cheeks. "Don't get smart with me. You don't belong at the top. You stole that valedictorian spot. Everyone knows it. My dad says it. The teachers know it. Even you must know it. You're a charity case, Nora Whitman. A mascot for this broken little town." Nora Whitman's voice was cold and clear, every syllable ringing like a bell. "You know what I am, Ethan Cole? I'm someone you can't control. And that terrifies you, doesn't it?" Ethan Cole glared, his fists clenching at his sides, his words spilling out, raw and poisonous. "You think you're people? You're just a monkey playing dress-up, parroting what you hear, stealing what you'll never deserve. I earned that speech. I earned that future. You took it from me." Silence dropped over the diner. Mr. Walter Hayes, the old man in the corner, slowly put down his paper, watching with icy disapproval. For a heartbeat, Ethan Cole faltered, caught in that sharp, assessing stare, but his anger surged, desperate not to lose face. He sneered, his voice trembling with rage. "Get down and clean my shoes. Now." Nora looked at him, her face unreadable, and shook her head. "I'd rather walk out with my dignity than kneel for your approval." "Suit yourself," Ethan Cole spat, looking around for backup. His friends shifted uncomfortably, suddenly unsure. The old man moved as if to rise, then clutched his chest with a cough, his knuckles white on the table. The spell of the moment wavered before anyone could move further. The bell over the diner door jingled, a sharp, discordant note slicing through the tension. Everyone turned, their breath caught in their throats. Someone else was about to enter, someone who would change everything. The door chimed, slicing through the standoff like a razor. All eyes turned. A gust of sharp perfume and cold air swept in with Vivian Lockwood. She moved with absolute authority, her heels clicking, her designer purse swinging, her sunglasses perched on flawless hair. Vivian Lockwood wasn't just any customer. She was the CEO of a local real estate firm and the president of the Homeowners Association, a woman used to owning every room she entered. In Nora's eyes, she wasn't just power dressed in silk, she was the enforcer behind every rule and threat in their lives. Harlan's posture shifted instantly. "And Vivian Lockwood," he called out, his voice tinged with both pride and expectation, as if announcing royalty. Vivian Lockwood paused, her sunglasses glinting, and surveyed the chaos. The overturned soup, the red sauce staining the floor, Nora Whitman standing stiff-backed and silent. Her mouth curled, not in concern but in cold appraisal. She gave Harlan's friends a nod, barely a flicker of acknowledgement, then locked eyes with Nora Whitman, as if sizing up a problem she planned to erase. "Well, this is charming," Vivian Lockwood pronounced, her voice ringing with disdain. "I see standards have dropped since my last visit, or is it just a case of poor help?" She didn't wait for an answer. "Ethan Cole, are you all right? Did someone hurt you?" Harlan's bravado returned instantly. "She spilled food all over me. She was rude. She doesn't know how to do her job." Vivian Lockwood's gaze drifted over Nora Whitman, lingering on the frayed apron, the trembling jaw. Typical, no work ethic, no respect for property, no understanding of manners. Her words were weapons chosen for their sting. And yet here you are, dragging down the standards for everyone else. That's always the way, isn't it? Nora Whitman bit the inside of her cheek, her hands clenched so tightly the notepad threatened to snap. She swallowed the retort that burned at the back of her throat, keeping her chin lifted. Vivian Lockwood circled the table, the heels of her shoes echoing with every step. This is what happens when you give people with no sense of decency a place in polite society, she continued, raising her voice just enough for the diner to hear. Laziness, entitlement, a complete disregard for the rules that keep a community thriving. She stopped, standing between Ethan Cole and Nora Whitman, like a barrier of privilege and prejudice. Remind me, aren't you the same girl whose grandmother's causing such a mess in our neighborhood? Vivian Lockwood's smile was thin and venomous. Blinds and tatters, weeds everywhere, property values sinking like a stone, and let's not forget strange men coming and going at all hours. Nora's eyes widened, a flash of shock breaking through her control. Vivian Lockwood leaned in, her voice low and intimate. You see, I'm not just any customer. I'm the reason you still have a roof over your head. For now. Harlan snickered, emboldened. Yeah, your grandma's place looks like it belongs in the dump. I heard the HOA wants her gone. Vivian Lockwood straightened, brushing a speck of invisible dust from her blazer. I am the HOA, she declared, and unless this display improves immediately, I'll see to it that your grandmother is evicted by the end of the month. Believe me, I can make that call in under a minute. Nora Whitman's composure threatened to splinter, but she gritted her teeth. My grandmother keeps to herself. She doesn't bother anyone. Vivian Lockwood scoffed. Her very existence is a blight. And you? Well, you're just following in her footsteps. If I wanted to, I could have you fired right now. I could pick up this phone and your little job here would vanish. One word, that's all it takes. The other waitress lingered nearby, frozen. Even the cook hesitated, waiting for someone, anyone, to speak up. But silence ruled, thick and paralyzing. Vivian Lockwood turned, her eyes cold. Now Ethan Cole, show me the damage. Ethan Cole stuck out his foot, showing off the sauce-stained Jordans like a badge of suffering. Completely ruined. And she just stood there. Vivian Lockwood pursed her lips, then turned to Nora Whitman, speaking with clinical precision. Well, don't just stand there. Get down and clean it. Maybe if you worked harder, you'd have more respect for other people's things, or perhaps respect is something your family never taught you. Every word sliced deeper. Nora stared at the shoes, then back at Vivian Lockwood. Her pride screamed. She would not bow. Not for this. But Vivian Lockwood wasn't done. She reached into her purse with a flourish, produced a crisp $100 bill, and flicked it carelessly to the ground at Nora Whitman's feet. The bill fluttered, settling in a greasy puddle reflected the harsh diner light. There you go, Vivian Lockwood sneered, her lips twisted in a mocking smile. Consider that a tip for your pathetic pride. Now pick it up and wipe his shoes clean. Let's see if you have even a shred of self-respect left. A raw, breathless hush fell over the diner as Arland leaned forward, a look of pure delight plastered across his face. Nora Whitman remained still, her gaze darting between the crisp bill lying on the grimy tile and Vivian Lockwood's cruel face. Two worlds collided, each offering its own brand of poison. In that instant, she understood that every eye in the place was upon her, every breath held in anticipation, waiting to see what she would do next. Nora stared at the money, then locked eyes with Vivian Lockwood for a long, charged moment. The air crackled with tension. The $100 bill glistened on the dirty floor, both a challenge and an insult. Vivian Lockwood's taunting words hung in the air like a physical blow. Nora's chest rose and fell, each breath fueling her resolve. Her hands trembled, but not with fear. Vivian Lockwood smirked, folding her arms with perfect confidence, convinced that this was the moment Nora Whitman would finally break. Ethan Cole slouched in his seat, a smug king reveling in her humiliation. Go ahead, he sneered. That's more money than you'll see in a month. Maybe you can buy your grandma some new curtains, or even better, a one-way ticket out of our neighborhood. Nora Whitman's fingers curled tightly into her palms. She took in the faces watching her, the cook peering from the window, the old man clutching his newspaper, the waitress frozen mid-stride. She felt the weight of their expectations, their silent demand that she bow down, give in, and confirm their prejudices. But Nora Whitman straightened her spine, standing taller than she ever had before. "No," she said quietly, her voice cutting through the silence, then louder for everyone to hear. "No, I won't do it." Vivian Lockwood's eyes narrowed, her mouth twisting with disdain. "Excuse me?" Nora Whitman shook her head, her voice gaining strength. "I'm not your servant, and I won't play your twisted games. You want respect? Try giving it." Lucas Miller shot to his feet, his anger flaring. "Watch your mouth." But Nora Whitman cut him off, her tone sharp, refusing to let his venom infect her. "Or what, Ethan Cole? Will you throw another tantrum, spill something else and pretend it's my fault?" Whispers rippled through the diner. Customers leaned in closer, drawn by the unfolding drama. Even the old man seemed to sit up straighter, curiosity and a flicker of hope in his eyes. Vivian Lockwood's face flushed, a red bloom of rage spreading across her cheeks. She leaned forward, her voice a low hiss. "You think you can talk to me like that? You barely belong here." Nora Whitman looked her dead in the eye, defiance radiating from her posture. "And yet here I am, and here you are, trying to prove your worth by stepping on someone else. That's not power, Vivian Lockwood. That's fear." For a fleeting moment, Vivian Lockwood seemed to falter, her carefully constructed mask slipping, but her pride snapped back into place. She spun toward the counter, her voice sharp and demanding. "I want the manager now. I refuse to be treated like this in my own community." The other waitress hesitated, her eyes darting nervously between Nora Whitman and the pair of bullies. But before anyone could move, Nora stepped forward, her words steady and deliberate. "You don't need to call anyone. I'm ending this right here." She reached for her notepad, tore off the ticket, and laid it flat on the table. "Your meal is on me. I'll pay for it out of my wages, but I won't serve you. Not another drink, not another bite. You can take your money and your attitude somewhere else." A ripple of surprise swept through the room. Ethan Cole's jaw dropped in disbelief. Vivian Lockwood's nails dug into the palm of her hand. The cook let out a low whistle of admiration. Nora Whitman's gaze swept the diner, drawing strength from every silent ally. "I don't need your money, I don't need your approval, and I definitely don't need to kneel for people who only feel tall when they're making someone else small." A murmur of agreement rippled from the back of the diner. Someone clapped, tentatively but sincerely. The cook nodded in approval, and the old man set his newspaper aside, watching with a newfound interest. Ethan Cole glared, his voice breaking the tense silence. "You'll regret this. People like you always do." But Nora Whitman didn't blink. "People like me? You mean people who work for what they have? People who don't get everything handed to them? Maybe it's time someone reminded you how to earn respect." Vivian Lockwood's composure finally shattered. Her voice rose shrill and ugly. "This is outrageous. You think you're above us? You think you matter? Let me tell you something, girl. I make the rules in this town. You're nothing." Nora's answer was simple, quiet, and final. "Then why are you so afraid of me standing up?" The room was electric, every nerve ending thrumming with anticipation. Customers shifted in their seats, some murmuring their agreement, others simply grateful to see someone finally draw a line. Vivian Lockwood's hands shook as she reached for her phone, but her voice wavered with a mixture of rage and uncertainty. "This isn't over. I'll make sure you regret this. Ethan Cole, show her her place right now." Ethan Cole, his face red with fury and his fists clenched, surged to his feet. Nora didn't flinch. For the first time, it was he who hesitated, as if the balance of power in the room had shifted, and he alone had failed to notice. But pride and rage are potent fuels. With one swift motion, Ethan Cole shoved his chair back and squared his shoulders, forcing Nora Whitman to back toward the counter. At the counter, the world shrank to a tense standoff. Nora Whitman, alone but unbroken, faced two predators eager to see her humiliated. Arlan's breath came in ragged gasps, his fists clenched tight, his pride bleeding from the wounds she had inflicted. Vivian Lockwood stood just behind him, her mask of elegance gone, replaced by something raw and vindictive. Ethan Cole's voice cracked the silence. "You think you can talk to us like that? Think again." He lunged forward and grabbed Nora's wrist, yanking her close. She tried to pull away, but he twisted her arm behind her back, forcing her down. Nora Whitman fought back, her teeth clenched in defiance. "Let me go. Get your hands off me." But Ethan Cole pressed harder, shoving her to her knees in front of the register. "You want dignity? How does the floor taste, princess?" Nora Whitman spat at his shoes, her eyes blazing with fury. "You're disgusting. This is what power looks like to you." He leaned in, whispering so only she could hear. "This is what winning looks like. You'll never be more than a servant." She shot back, her voice filled with contempt. "Touch me again and I'll press charges. I'll tell the police everything." He laughed, cold and sharp. "You can try. My father has half this town on speed dial. Who's going to listen to a broke little waitress over me?" Vivian Lockwood's voice rang out, high and manic. "Make sure she learns her place, Ethan Cole. Smash her face. Do it. Let everyone see what happens when you forget where you belong." A ripple of fear snaked through the diners. Someone fumbled for a phone but shrank back under Vivian Lockwood's glare. The old man in the corner bristled, his lips pressed into a thin line. Arlan's hand shot out, fisting Nora Whitman's hair. He slammed her face toward the counter hard enough to send a shock through her body. "Say you're sorry," he snarled, his voice laced with malice. Nora Whitman bit back tears, biting him with every ounce of strength she possessed. "You're cowards, both of you. Everyone in here sees it. They see exactly what you are." Ethan Cole's grip tightened on her arm. He rammed his fist into her stomach. Pain exploded through Nora, stealing the air from her lungs. She doubled over, gasping, but refused to break. "You think money is a shield?" she rasped, her voice strained. "One day it'll bury you." Arlan sneered, his lips close to her ear. "Not today, sweetheart." Vivian Lockwood clapped, wild and hungry for more. "That's right, Ethan Cole. Teach her what real pain feels like. She thinks she can threaten us. She's nothing." Nora Whitman found her voice, raw and defiant. "This is assault. You'll pay for this. Maybe not today, but you'll pay." Arlan drew back his fist, ready to strike her face. The diner door burst open, a blast of cold air and the rumble of heavy boots filling the space. Every head turned toward the entrance. A lone figure stepped inside. Steel Jack. He was a mountain of muscle gone silver. A heavy black leather jacket stretched over a barrel chest, the Hell's Angels logo emblazoned boldly on his back. His beard was white, his eyes hard and unblinking. He took in the scene, Nora Whitman on her knees, Arlan's fist raised, Vivian Lockwood flushed with triumph. He didn't shout. His words were low and steady, thrumming with the promise of violence. "Let her go," Steel Jack commanded. Owen Brooks snorted, but the hand fisting Nora Whitman's hair faltered. He spun around, his eyes raking over the old biker. "Who the hell are you? Mind your own business, old man. You're just trash. Everyone in this town knows it." Vivian Lockwood joined in, her voice dripping with venom. "This isn't a charity. Go crawl back to whatever gutter you came from." Steel Jack's gaze slid past Ethan Cole and locked on Nora Whitman, sizing up the blood on her lip, the tremor in her shoulders, the fury in her eyes. He gave her a small, reassuring nod. Arlan squared his shoulders, trying to look imposing. "You want me to call the cops? You want to go to jail tonight?" Steel Jack barely blinked. "You want to see what happens if you touch her again?" Arlan laughed, looking to Vivian Lockwood for backup. "Let's call the police. Tell them some biker trash just threatened us. Who do you think they'll believe?" Steel Jack's mouth twisted into a cold half-smile. He turned and, without a word, put 2 fingers to his lips and let out a long, shrill whistle. The sound cut through the diner, piercing and ancient. For a moment, nothing happened. Just the trembling of the windows, the stillness of a room caught holding its breath. Then, Outside, the roar of motorcycle engines fell silent in unison. The ground seemed to shift beneath their feet. Through the glass, shadows loomed, big, broad, unmistakably dangerous. Inside, a slow, heavy rhythm grew, boots thudding against the floorboards, 20 strong, shaking the bones of the old diner. Arlen's bravado drained from his face, leaving him pale and shaken. Vivian Lockwood stepped back, her hand gripping the edge of the counter for support. Nora Whitman looked up, meeting Steel Jack's eyes. For the first time since the nightmare had begun, she felt the weight on her shoulders ease, not gone, but shared. Steel Jack faced Ethan Cole, his voice iron and thunder. "Last warning. Take your hands off her, or you'll answer to me, and every brother standing behind me." The tension in the air snapped taut. Every soul in the diner strained to see what would break first, hate or courage, cruelty or justice. One by one, hulking men in battered leather jackets pushed through the entrance, their boots landing with a promise of retribution. 19 bikers, faces grim and eyes hard, fanned out across Daisy's diner. Every square inch of the diner seemed to shrink beneath the oppressive weight of their presence. Arlen's grip on Nora vanished as if burned away. He stumbled backward, his face drained of all bravado, desperately looking for a place to hide, but finding only walls. Vivian Lockwood, always quick to recover, puffed herself up and jabbed a finger toward the group. "This is outrageous. I know the sheriff personally. All of you are trespassing criminals." Her voice shook, but she clung to her authority like a lifeline. "You'll all be in jail by sundown." Her words drew only silence from the bikers. 2 men, each easily twice Owen Brooks's size, blocked the exits, their arms folded, their eyes hard and unwavering. The rest surrounded the counter, an unspoken verdict already passed. Ethan Cole, his voice shrill with desperation, tried to spit venom. "Get away from me, you freaks, you're just trash. Biker scum, you can't touch me. My dad owns half this town." Steel Jack only watched him with icy patience. A single nod was enough. 2 bikers surged forward. Ethan Cole tried to run, but a fist, swift and heavy, met his jaw with a sickening crack. He flew backward, crashing against the counter, clutching his mouth, dazed and helpless. He tried to crawl away, but a boot pinned his shoulder to the floor. The second biker, his face impassive, landed a punch to Arlen's gut, driving the wind from his body. Arlen gasped, writhing in agony, the arrogance stripped from him with each brutal blow. All around them, the other bikers formed a silent wall, witnesses to their brand of justice. Vivian Lockwood shrieked, lunging toward Lucas Miller. Her manicured fingers curled like claws, but she didn't make it far. One of the bikers stepped in, catching her by the wrist. There was no hesitation. He slapped her hard, sending her sprawling across the filthy floor, right into the mess of spilled food and scattered napkins. The diner fell into a stunned hush. No one moved. No one dared to speak. Nora Whitman, her chest heaving, wiped the blood from her lip and watched as her tormentors tasted real fear for the first time. Vivian Lockwood's composure had shattered completely. Gone was the polished CEO and homecoming queen. In her place was a woman crawling through the muck, tears streaming down her face, her lipstick smeared, her carefully constructed dignity shattered. "You can't do this. I'll ruin all of you, I swear." The bikers ignored her desperate threats. Ethan Cole lay sobbing, clutching his stomach, gasping for air. Blood trickled from his mouth. All the hateful words he had weaponized were gone, replaced by pathetic whimpers. Steel Jack finally moved. He stooped, offered a steady hand to Nora Whitman, and pulled her to her feet. The entire room seemed to pivot around that small act of kindness offered without pity. He turned then to the broken figures on the floor, his stare boring into Lucas Miller and Vivian Lockwood, pinning them to the floor with shame. His voice rang deep, carrying over every head in the diner. "Last week this whole town turned its back on us, wouldn't serve us a drop of coffee. Only one person treated us like human beings, this girl. She poured us coffee, smiled, showed us respect." He paused, letting the weight of the memory settle over the room. Respect goes both ways. She gave it. Today, we return the favor. The bikers nodded, a silent brotherhood sealing their judgment. Steel Jack glared at Lucas Miller, then at Vivian Lockwood. You like making others crawl? You like the taste of dirt? He jerked his chin at the mess beneath them. Clean it up now with that fancy jacket. Ethan Cole, make it shine. Ethan Cole, still shaking uncontrollably, struggled out of his expensive varsity jacket. His hands fumbled, slick with sweat and blood. He dropped to his knees and began scrubbing the filthy floor with the same jacket that had once symbolized his untouchability. Vivian Lockwood, splattered and humiliated, had no choice but to follow, her designer skirt streaked with filth. Nora Whitman stood above them, not gloating, but quietly reclaiming her place in the world. Around her, customers who had cowered only moments before now whispered amongst themselves. Some even grinned, relief and vindication finally breaking through the tension. Steel Jack leaned down, his voice low and grave, so only Ethan Cole and Vivian Lockwood could hear. If I ever see that girl cry because of you again, it won't just be the diner we visit. Remember that. The threat lingered in the air, heavy as an approaching storm, and yet those consumed by arrogance and a belief in their own superiority rarely surrender easily. Vivian Lockwood and Ethan Cole were about to do something that even the Hells Angels hadn't anticipated. Outside Daisy S. Diner, the night air bit deep and cold, a stark contrast to the fever of humiliation burning in Vivian Lockwood's veins. She practically dragged Ethan Cole across the cracked pavement toward her Mercedes, her heels skidding on the icy ground, her fingers white-knuckled around her phone. Ethan Cole limped behind, clutching his ribs, his face blotched with blood and shame. Vivian Lockwood slammed the car door shut behind them, her lips pressed into a tight, furious line. Her hands trembled as she jabbed at her phone screen, each movement laced with rage. She didn't care that her makeup was smeared or that bits of grit clung to her skirt. All that mattered was revenge. I won't let them get away with this, she hissed, her voice trembling with fury. Not in my town. Arlen slid low in the passenger seat, avoiding her gaze. They could have killed us. Did you see the way those freaks looked at me? She ignored his fear, her thumb stabbing the screen until she heard a familiar voice on the other end. Sheriff Cole Hardin. The phone call had detonated like a bomb. Sheriff Cole Hardin, this is Elena Whitmore, or rather, Vivian Lockwood. You need to dispatch a SWAT team to Daisy's Diner immediately. We're under attack by a gang of armed bikers and some lowlifes targeting decent people. I demand they all be arrested. Ethan Cole and I barely escaped with our lives. Silence stretched, thick and expectant. Vivian Lockwood's heart hammered, accustomed to immediate compliance. She'd leveraged favors before, erasing problems with a mere phone call, but tonight the line remained icily unresponsive. Finally, Sheriff Cole Hardin spoke, his voice devoid of emotion, strangely distant. Vivian Lockwood, calm down. Who's leading this group? Steel Jack. Him and those Hells Angels animals. She spat the words out. Another pause followed, even heavier this time. Listen, Sheriff Cole Hardin said, his voice dropping. That's Steel Jack, and frankly his crew hasn't technically broken any laws tonight. He's got too many friends, too many secrets on too many people in this town, myself included. You want to declare war on those people? You're on your own. I can't touch them over a petty bar fight and a bruised ego. Not for you, not for anyone. Vivian Lockwood's grip on the phone tightened, nearly cracking the plastic. You're the sheriff. You're supposed to protect us. I'm not safe here. Harlan's not safe. Sheriff Cole Hardin's reply was colder than the night air. Then maybe don't go picking fights with people you can't handle. He hung up. The abrupt beep echoed in Vivian Lockwood's ears, leaving a ringing emptiness. For a moment, the car was silent save for Harlan's ragged breathing. Vivian Lockwood's world lurched. She, the queen of the HOA, the untouchable CEO, abandoned by the very system she had manipulated her entire life. She turned slowly, dangerously to Ethan Cole. "Do you see what happens when you trust the wrong people?" Her voice trembled with barely suppressed rage. "The law is nothing but a bunch of cowards and sellouts in this town." Ethan Cole dabbed at his mouth, his voice muffled and fearful. "We can't let them get away with this. My dad will—" She cut him off. "Your dad can't buy you out of this, Ethan Cole. We've been humiliated, beaten, made fools of by trash. As for those bikers, we won't touch them again, ever." She looked up, her eyes burning with a deeper, colder fire. Through the window she saw Nora Whitman, standing small but defiant, radiating a light that twisted Vivian Lockwood's insides with renewed hatred. She leaned closer to Ethan Cole, her words a near whisper, sharp as a blade. "Listen to me. Wolves are dangerous, and they travel in packs. You can't hunt wolves, not here, not tonight. But sheep wander off. Sheep can be broken." She continued, "Nora Whitman thinks she's safe hidden behind those monsters, but she's nothing. She's alone, and I will destroy her future before she even realizes it's gone." Harland glanced up, a flicker of old malice reigniting in his battered eyes. "Ow!" Vivian Lockwood's smile was thin, brittle. "Leave that to me. I'm not finished with her, not by a long shot." She watched Nora Whitman inside the diner, resolute, unbowed, then turned the key in the ignition, her mind already calculating her next move. Humiliation had tempered her cruelty into something colder, more precise. She would strip away everything Nora Whitman held dear, and she would do it with the same silent ruthlessness she'd used to reach the top. As the Mercedes sped away into the darkness, the last glimpse in the rearview mirror was of Nora Whitman, hugging herself in the flickering light, oblivious to the storm now gathering around her. The hunt would now leave the shadows and step into the halls of Crestview High. The next morning, the fluorescent lights of Crestview High seemed harsher than ever. Nora Whitman walked through the echoing halls with a new weight pressing down on her shoulders. She clutched a folder containing her latest test results, her name circled in red ink at the top. Another perfect score. For a fleeting moment she dared to hope. Perhaps after the previous night's ordeal, something good would finally come her way. She barely registered the glances, the whispers, the nervous energy crackling between the lockers. She had grown accustomed to being watched, to the uneasy respect and silent resentment that followed a black girl who consistently outperformed the privileged sons and daughters of Crestview's elite. Still, today the stairs felt colder, harder. Halfway to class, the PA system crackled to life. "Nora Whitman, please report to the principal's office. Nora Whitman, report to Principal Miller." The announcement sent a shiver through the hallway. Nora paused, clutching her folder. Was this recognition at last? Maybe Miller wanted to discuss her scholarship, the valedictorian speech, her future. She pushed aside the lingering fear from the previous night and allowed herself to believe in something better. The office door loomed ahead, polished and intimidating. The secretary avoided her gaze as she gestured for Nora to enter. Miller's office was a shrine to authority, diplomas, old football trophies, a photo of the principal shaking hands with a local congressman. Today, Miller stood by the window, his back stiff, his posture tense. But Nora's eyes were drawn to something else. Harland sat slumped in the corner, sporting a faint purple bruise across his cheek, a smug expression on his face. He didn't look directly at her, but a ghost of a smile played on his lips, cold and triumphant. Nora's heart skipped a beat. Something was terribly wrong. She tried to steady her breath, bracing for the impending storm. Principal Miller cleared his throat and gestured for her to sit. "BL," he began, "I imagine you know why you're here." She shook her head. "No, sir." He sighed, settling into his chair and folding his hands. "I wish it were under better circumstances. I'm afraid there have been serious allegations made against you." "Very serious." Nora blinked, confused. What?" Miller's face hardened. "Yesterday evening there was an incident at Daisy's diner involving you, Ethan Cole, and several members of a known biker gang." Multiple witnesses, he glanced at Ethan Cole, who nodded with practiced innocence, have come forward claiming you threatened Owen Brooks's safety and conspired with these individuals to intimidate and assault him. Nora stared, words failing her. That's not what happened. Owen Brooks cut her off, his voice shaking just enough to sound credible. She brought them there, Principal Miller. I tried to leave, but she wouldn't let me. One of them hit me. Look what they did. He touched his bruised cheek with a shaky hand. Miller's eyes were sympathetic. I've spoken to several staff members and reviewed what security footage we could obtain. Regrettably, the security cameras at the diner were malfunctioning during the incident. Nora's mind raced. She remembered Vivian Lockwood's threats, the look in her eyes as she promised revenge. This was no accident. Vivian Lockwood's hand was all over this. Sir, that's a lie, Nora said, her voice trembling with anger. They ambushed me. Ethan Cole and his friends attacked me. Elena Whitmore told them to. The bikers only stepped in because... Miller held up a hand, silencing her. Nora Whitman, these are very grave accusations. But the evidence, we have a police report from Harlan's parents, testimony from other students, even a statement from the diner's owner, all point in the same direction, that you orchestrated a confrontation endangering your classmate and others. She shook her head. You're not listening. The only reason there isn't footage is because... He cut her off again. Enough. I've heard more than enough. As principal, I am responsible for the safety and reputation of this institution. And Nora, you are suspended from Crestview High, effective immediately, pending an investigation. Your participation in extracurriculars, all leadership roles... He hesitated, the final blow hidden behind a mask of false regret. Your eligibility for the Crestview Foundation Scholarship are hereby revoked. The board has decided the scholarship will be awarded to Ethan Cole in recognition of his character and the adversity he has endured. The words hit harder than any physical blow. Nora stared at Miller, at Harlan's smug, victorious expression. It didn't seem real. You can't do this, she whispered, her voice breaking. You know what he's done. You know what I've worked for. Miller's tone grew cold, distant, bureaucratic. Society needs leaders who act with dignity and restraint, Nora Whitman, not those who resort to violence to solve their problems. Consider this a lesson. Harlan stood, collecting his bag. He brushed past Nora, whispering just loud enough for her to hear. You should have stayed on the floor. Nora's hands trembled, rage and grief boiling inside her. You won't get away with this, she said softly. But neither man seemed to hear her. Principal Miller shuffled his papers, already moving on. You'll be escorted from campus. I hope you'll reflect on what you've done. Nora rose, numb, clutching her folder, her dreams slipping through her fingers. She walked the long, silent corridor out of the principal's office, each step echoing with disbelief and betrayal. Outside, the sky had turned iron grey. Clouds hung low, threatening rain. Students moved past her, their eyes sliding away, afraid to get too close. Nora's heart ached, not just for herself, but for every kid who ever believed hard work was enough. She walked alone out the doors of Crestview High, a storm raging behind her and nowhere left to go. But the worst was still waiting for her at home. Nora trudged home, her steps slow, her mind reeling. Each footfall echoed with the weight of loss, her scholarship, her dignity, her place in the world. The sky, low and bruised, seemed to mirror her despair. By the time she reached her block, the wind had picked up, carrying the scent of rain and something sharper, panic. Then she saw it, the crowd clustered outside her grandmother's tiny house. Boxes, clothing, her grandmother's porcelain lamp, all scattered on the cracked sidewalk. 2 uniformed officers stood by, arms folded, their faces impassive. A moving truck idled at the curb. A cold pit opened in Nora's stomach. She rushed forward. "What are you doing? Stop! That's our stuff!" Vivian Lockwood's voice sliced through the confusion, crisp and unmistakable. She stood beside the mailbox, clipboard in hand, her heels planted firmly on the walkway like a judge at a sentencing. "There you are, Nora. I was beginning to think you'd abandoned your poor grandmother as well." Nora ignored her. rushing to her grandmother, who sat slumped in her wheelchair, her eyes wet but her cheeks dry, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "Grandma, are you okay? What happened?" Nora knelt beside her, brushing back her hair. Her grandmother shook her head, her lips trembling. They just started pulling everything out. "I asked them to wait to let me call someone, but they said it was the law." One of the officers, a younger man with a name badge that read Steel Jack, avoided Nora's gaze. "This is an official HOA-ordered eviction, ma'am. Please stay back while we complete the process." Vivian Lockwood approached, her smile razor-thin. "Violation of HOA rules, hosting unsanctioned gatherings, harboring undesirables, allowing disruptive elements in the community. Those bikers, your so-called friends, coming and going at all hours. We gave you every opportunity to comply." Nora felt the world spin, even as she stood in the open air. "You can't do this. My grandmother's lived here for decades. She's done nothing wrong." Vivian Lockwood didn't flinch. Rules are rules. "Your little protest at the diner didn't go unnoticed, Nora Whitman. Actions have consequences. Perhaps next time you'll remember your place." A few neighbors watched from their porches, some whispering, most silent. Nora searched their faces for sympathy, but saw only pity, or worse, relief that for once trouble had come for someone else. The officers moved through the house, carrying boxes, upending drawers, treating every piece of Nora's life like disposable clutter. A favorite sweater, her grandmother's Sunday hat, the framed photo of her father in uniform. Nothing was sacred. Nora's chest burned. She spun to face Vivian Lockwood. "You call yourself a leader? All you've done is ruin lives. This isn't justice, it's cruelty." Vivian Lockwood leaned in, her voice low, almost tender. "That's the way the world works, darling. The sooner you accept it, the less it hurts." Nora's grandmother began to sob, a thin, dry wail. It was the sound of defeat, of a heart breaking in silence. Nora knelt beside her, wrapping her arms around the frail shoulders. She tried to hold herself together, to be strong, but the devastation was complete. "Don't cry, Grandma," she whispered, fighting back her own tears. "We still have each other. That's more than they'll ever have." Vivian Lockwood turned away, signaling the officers to continue. "Remove them from the premises. The locks will be changed by sundown." Nora stood, her fists clenched, her voice clear and defiant. "You can throw us out, but you can't erase us. We're not going anywhere." Vivian Lockwood didn't answer. She basked in their misery, turning to exchange a smirk with one of the HOA board members who had come to witness the spectacle. As the officers began to wheel Nora's grandmother away, the old woman broke down, tears falling silently. Nora hugged her tightly, promising comfort she no longer believed in. Across the street, the neighborhood children stopped their game, their laughter dying as they watched the two women lose everything. Nora scanned the wreckage of her life clothes, books, fragments of memories scattered and exposed for the world to see. But she would not allow herself to cry. Not here. Not for Vivian Lockwood. She would not give them that satisfaction. She pulled out her phone, her hands steady now, rage sharpening her mind. She dialed, listened as the line rang, then spoke, her voice hard as iron. "Uncle Steel Jack, it's me. I need your help. Not fists, but truth. I want to fight this the right way." The sky finally split open, rain falling on everything she had left. But Nora stood tall, sheltering her grandmother, already planning her next move. The rain eased into a heavy drizzle as Nora helped her grandmother settle in with a neighbor, then set out, her heart pulsing with defiance. She walked through the streets, anger and grief fighting for control, until she reached the outskirts of town, a place she'd only heard about in whispers, the Hells Angels Clubhouse. The building loomed under a battered neon sign, its paint faded, its windows glowing dimly. For a moment, Nora hesitated, clutching her coat tighter against the chill. This was no place for a 17-year-old girl, not even one who had lost everything. But she had no choice. If the world wouldn't give her justice, she would have to carve it out herself. She pushed open the heavy door. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of oil and leather. The walls were covered in framed photographs, battle flags, and memorial plaques, a testament to brotherhood, loyalty, and scars. At a battered wooden table sat Steel Jack, his silver beard gleaming in the low light, his hands wrapped around a chipped mug of coffee. He looked up and saw her standing uncertainly in the doorway. "Sophie's girl," he rumbled, gesturing for her to come in. "Sit. You're safe here." She sat, her shoulders squared, her eyes refusing to let tears fall. "Thank you for helping me before. I didn't know where else to go." Steel Jack nodded, concern etched deep in his weathered face. "They took your home, didn't they?" She nodded. "Vivian Lockwood did. She used the law like a weapon. I don't know how to fight her, not in court. She controls everything." Steel Jack leaned back, his eyes searching her face. "She doesn't control everything, not yet." A shuffling in the corner caught Nora's attention. She turned and saw, sitting in a shadowed chair, the old man from the diner, Mr. Walter Hayes. He exuded a certain presence, a quiet gravity that seemed to transcend his frail frame and careful movements. Nora's brow furrowed. "Mr. Walter Hayes, what are you doing here?" Steel Jack's lips twitched in the faintest smile. "He's not just any old man, Nora Whitman. Meet Justice Wallace. Once upon a time, he was on the Supreme Court of the state. He and I served together a long time ago." A mischievous glint danced in Walter Hayes's eyes. Steel Jack was right. He was far from out of the game. "I spent decades interpreting the law. Now my time is mostly spent reading about how people pervert it." He leaned forward, the ancient flip phone clutched in his hand. A cautious, fragile hope flickered within Nora. "Why are you here?" Walter Hayes's voice was gentle yet firm. "Because I saw what happened at the diner. I saw more than anyone realized." He held up the battered phone, a relic of a bygone era. "They laugh at this dinosaur, but these old things can be surprisingly useful. I recorded the entire conversation at Daisy's, including Vivian Lockwood's explicit order to smash your face. Crystal clear. Every ugly word." Nora stared, stunned. You have proof?" Walter Hayes nodded, his gaze unwavering. "Audio only, but it's enough. You can clearly hear Vivian Lockwood inciting violence, Harlan's threats ringing in the air. Their money has twisted the law, but evidence like this is difficult to erase." Steel Jack's fists clenched in satisfaction. "You hear that? You've got a real weapon now, kid." Nora Whitman's voice trembled, a mix of relief and disbelief. "But will anyone listen? She has money, lawyers, friends in high places." A genuine smile, etched with age, wisdom, and resolve, spread across Walter Hayes's face. "Money can buy influence, it can twist the rules. But there's a world of difference between the law and justice. The law can be bent, delayed, even bought for a while. But true justice always finds its way, if someone refuses to surrender." He placed the phone on the table, sliding it toward Nora. "I'll represent you. You have my word. We'll ensure the whole world hears the truth of what happened. And if Vivian Lockwood wants to see what real consequences look like, I'll be delighted to show her." Hope ignited in Nora's heart as she gripped the phone. "Thank you. I don't want revenge. I just want them to stop hurting people like us." Steel Jack chuckled, clapping her on the shoulder. "That's why you're worth fighting for." The three began to meticulously map out a plan. No violence, no threats, only the truth and the law wielded by hands that had known both pain and principle. Walter Hayes detailed their strategy for submitting the evidence, involving the press and forcing the school, the HOA, and the police to finally answer for their complicity. Nora listened, determination hardening with each detail. As the night deepened, a newfound resolve settled over the clubhouse. The bikers nodded their approval as Walter Hayes rose to leave, as if an unspoken pact had been sealed. Just before departing, Walter Hayes turned back, his voice steady and clear. "Law can be bent by money, Nora Whitman, but justice never truly breaks. I'll stand by you every step of the way." Nora stepped out into the damp darkness, her spirit no longer shattered. She was not alone, and for the first time since it all began, The future shimmered with possibility. The war would not be fought with fists, but with truth. And this time, she was ready. The Crestview Country Club had never looked more opulent. Crystal chandeliers cascaded light onto pristine white linen. Every glass gleamed, every guest meticulously polished for Elena Whitmore's grand charity gala. Cameras flashed, reporters hovered, and Crestview's elite gathered in exclusive clusters: city councilmen, donors, realtors, school board members, and of course, the president of the Homeowners Association herself. Vivian Lockwood stood at the epicenter of it all, resplendent in a cobalt blue dress, her smile wide and practiced. "Tonight," she declared, her voice resonating through the ballroom, "we come together to support the families of our great community. It is our duty, our calling, to help those less fortunate rise to their potential with dignity, discipline, and unity." Polite applause rippled through the crowd. No one noticed the new face among the catering staff, a young woman in a crisp black uniform, moving quietly between tables with a tray of hors d'oeuvres. Nora Whitman, head down, hair tucked beneath a cap, moved invisibly through the sea of expensive perfume and privilege. At the back of the room, Walter Hayes watched from a table near the sound booth, his eyes sharp behind thick glasses. Beside him, Steel Jack sat with arms folded, blending into the background with surprising ease. The plan was in motion. Vivian Lockwood worked the crowd with practiced precision air kisses, firm handshakes, her laughter bright and calculated. She paused on stage again, beaming. "It's about accountability. In a healthy community, everyone must pull their weight. Without discipline, there is chaos. Without order, there is decay. And without strong leadership, there is only failure." Nora's stomach churned at the blatant hypocrisy. She remembered the boxes on the curb, her grandmother's tears, the voice that had spat poison into every corner of her life, but she didn't falter. She wove through the crowd, ensuring every wire, every microphone was precisely where it needed to be. The first act concluded. The applause faded. Vivian Lockwood handed the stage over to the school board president and slipped off to the green room, bone already clutched in hand. The mask of compassion vanished as the door closed behind her. Her voice, sharp and furious, echoed off marble and velvet. "Lucas Miller, are you listening? How many times do I have to spell it out? That girl, Nora Whitman, is not going to ruin us. I don't care what you have to do. Get rid of her. I want her gone. Do you hear me? I'm sick of her face, her whining, her pathetic little family. She's trash. I want you to make her wish she'd never set foot in Crestview. You and your father, with all that money, can't even handle one little black brat. You're as useless as your father's money if you don't finish this tonight. You know what happens to people who embarrass me. You want me to spell it out? If you can't handle it, I'll find someone who can." She paused, breath heavy, venom spent. "Now listen, call me when it's done, or don't call me at all." But across the stage, the ballroom had grown deathly silent. The words had stopped Vivian Lockwood in her tracks, and it was only then that she noticed the faint echo of her own voice playing not just in her ear, but over every speaker in the grand hall. A technician, one of Steel Jack's friends, had leaned into the mixing board, flipping a switch at Walter Hayes' signal. Every word, every slur, every threat had been broadcast into the crowd. No music, no laughter, only the slow, sickening revelation of the woman they'd all applauded. Gasps filled the room, followed by an icy, appalled silence. Councilmen and donors stared at one another. The principal of Crestview High nearly dropped his glass. Parents recoiled, lips parted in disbelief. Vivian Lockwood froze, the color draining from her face. She fumbled with her phone, panic rising. Through the swinging doors, she caught a glimpse of Nora Whitman, face calm, eyes unwavering, watching her from behind the caterer's tray. Walter Hayes rose to his feet, clearing his throat. "Seems we've all heard something that wasn't meant for our ears," he announced. "But perhaps it was meant for our hearts." A ripple of murmurs swept the hall. Someone shouted, "Is that who we're giving our money to?" Another muttered, "How long has she been like this?" A teacher whispered, "She's been gunning for Nora Whitman all year." Now we know why. Vivian Lockwood stood just off stage, shaking, clutching her phone as if it might anchor her. She tried to compose herself, but the damage was done. All eyes followed her as she emerged onto the stage, mascara streaking, mouth opening and closing in a desperate search for words. For a heartbeat, she considered denying it, blaming a technical glitch, lashing out at the staff. But the truth had already settled over the room like a storm cloud, heavy, inevitable, impossible to ignore. In the back, Nora Whitman felt her knees grow weak, not with fear but with relief. For once, she wasn't the only one who knew what kind of woman Vivian Lockwood truly was, and in that charged, breathless silence, the community Vivian Lockwood had ruled with fear and charm began to see her, for the first time, without her mask. The morning sun rose, washing Crestview high in gold, as if trying to cleanse it of old stains. But the tension in the halls was thicker than ever. Rumors about the charity gala and Vivian Lockwood's public disgrace burned through every text thread and whispered conversation. But there was something else brewing, a tension that drew eyes to the front gate, where nothing felt quite normal. Nora Whitman stood at the edge of her block, breath turning white in the crisp morning air. She smoothed her skirt, brushed lint from her battered backpack, and glanced down the street. She was supposed to stay home, suspended, exiled, unwanted, but justice wasn't a courtesy, and dignity wasn't for sale. Not anymore. A deep, rumbling thunder cut through the suburban quiet. First a single Harley, then another, then another. Soon the ground vibrated beneath the weight of 50 motorcycles, engines roaring, chrome flashing, leather vests emblazoned with the red and white insignia of the Hells Angels. At their center rode Iron Mike, his beard catching the light, eyes locked on Nora Whitman. Neighbors stepped outside, jaws slack. School bus drivers slowed, unsure if they were witnessing a parade or an invasion. Children and parents gathered on sidewalks, drawn by the defiant music of engines and the spectacle of power reimagined. Steel Jack swung off his bike, offered Nora Whitman his hand. "Are you ready, kid?" She hesitated only a moment, more than ever. The procession rolled toward the high school, a cavalcade of steel and thunder. 50 bikers flanking Nora Whitman like a living shield. She walked at their center, head held high, heart pounding, not with fear but with an overwhelming, surging gratitude. They arrived at the school gates. The security guards, usually quick to step forward and enforce the rules, froze, then quietly stepped aside. The bikers didn't snarl, didn't threaten. They simply stood, arms folded, faces carved from stone. Not a word, just presence enough to make every teacher, every administrator reconsider their sense of power. Students clustered at the windows, phones pressed to glass, capturing video as the unthinkable played out. A few teachers looked away, ashamed. Others watched, lips parted, uncertain whose side they should be on. Nora Whitman crossed the courtyard, the click of her shoes echoing between the silent rows of motorcycles. Some students parted for her, wide-eyed, some jeered softly, others clapped, but no one dared stop her. Not today. She made it to the front doors, 49 bikers lining the walkway behind her. The 50th Steel Jack stood just inside, arms crossed, daring anyone to challenge her right to belong. For once, Nora Whitman felt the shield of others, not fists, not violence, but unity. Words spread through the halls in waves. Nora Whitman's back. She brought an army. Her classmates crowded at the entrance to the main corridor. Arland, at his usual spot by the window, watched it unfold. His hand trembled, and his pencil slipped from his fingers, clattering to the floor. The tremor in his chest wasn't just fear. It was the cold, dawning realization that all the money and privilege in the world couldn't summon this kind of loyalty, this kind of love. Nora Whitman kept walking, head high, eyes locked on the principal's office at the end of the hall. She didn't hide, didn't pause. She let the hallway swallow the sound of boots and whispers. Let it all roll off her back. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about every kid who'd ever been pushed aside, told to sit in the back, told to know their place. Iron Steel Jack followed behind, nodding to teachers, daring them to intervene. Not a soul moved. Some whispered in awe, others inched away. But the wall of bikers outside the window, watchful, patient, made sure not a single person even thought to block her path. At the main office, Principal Miller stood behind the glass, beads of sweat already prickling his brow. He watched as Walter Hayes, his suit immaculate, his walk slow but purposeful, strode in beside Steel Jack. For the first time, the old judge looked every inch the authority he'd once wielded in court. Walter Hayes fixed the principal with a steely gaze. "We have business, Mr. Miller. Let's discuss it in private." Steel Jack stood silent guard at the door, his presence alone a statement. The world was watching now, and justice had found new champions. In the classroom, Arlen slumped at his desk, the cold realization that he was no longer the center of gravity sinking in. Outside, the engines purred softly, a promise that courage wasn't just a word, but a bond, a living wall that shielded the vulnerable and warned every bully. The old rules were changing. Nora Whitman took her seat in the front row. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. For the first time, she understood the power of her own story and that she was never truly alone. The first clip went live before sunrise, a grainy audio file paired with the words, "Listen to what the HOA president said about Crestviews' own student." Within minutes, it was everywhere. Group chats, Facebook feeds, TikTok, local forums. The audio was clear, unmistakable. Vivian Lockwood's voice, sharp, entitled, venomous, spat orders and slurs into the phone. "That girl, Nora Whitman, is not going to ruin us. I want her gone. Black brat. She's trash." Tea spread like wildfire. By lunch, hashtag Justice for Nora Whitman and hashtag Karen Exposed were trending. Students played the recording in the halls, sometimes on full blast. Alumni posted it to class groups. Parents demanded answers at the school gate. "Did you hear what Elena Whitmore said? Wasn't she the one who evicted that old woman? I always thought she was generous. Guess that was for show." The local news seized on the story. Cameras parked outside Crestview High. Reporters tracked down anyone who had ever served on the HOA board. They interviewed teachers, parents, former tenants, even cashiers who remembered Vivian Lockwood's icy demands. One anchor closed the segment. "In a town where reputation was everything, Vivian Lockwood Foster has finally lost the one thing she could never buy: trust." It didn't stop there. The audio leak reached the state's largest media outlets. Political candidates eager to distance themselves issued statements denouncing Vivian Lockwood and praising Nora Whitman's courage. Lawyers weighed in on the legality of the eviction, the abuses of power, the ugly trail of intimidation stretching back years. Nora stayed home, fielding calls from old teachers, neighbors, and even strangers offering encouragement. She barely checked her phone, each notification a reminder that the world had finally noticed what she and her family had endured for so long. For the first time, she felt the weight of her own story shifting from burden to shield. Vivian Lockwood's world, meanwhile, was shrinking fast. The board of her real estate company called an emergency meeting. Overnight, the value of the company's stock dropped nearly 30%, investors fleeing the PR disaster. The company's biggest clients, developers, politicians, city contractors, began to cancel deals or demand public apologies. The next day, Vivian Lockwood arrived at her office and found her access badge disabled. The receptionist wouldn't meet her eyes. Inside the boardroom, a chilly silence greeted her. Her partners, the same men who'd once courted her approval, now leaned away, arms crossed, lips tight. "Vivian Lockwood," said the chairman, his voice formal, "we have no choice but to accept your resignation, effective immediately. The board is unanimous." She tried to protest, but he cut her off with a gesture. "Your statements have jeopardized every contract, every relationship. We cannot afford to be associated with this kind of scandal." Her HOA allies fared no better. One by one they called press conferences, reading carefully worded apologies. I am shocked and saddened. Vivian Lockwood's actions do not represent our values. We are cooperating fully with the investigation. Some even hinted at prior discomfort. She always ran things her way, and it's clear now we should have spoken up sooner, but perhaps the greatest betrayal came from the Kelly. The Harland family, paragons of Crestview wealth, stood for a portrait of damage control. At a hastily convened press conference, Mrs. Harland, a picture of forced composure, faced the cameras with her son and husband flanking her. We are deeply sorry for the pain our family's association with Miss Foster has caused, she declared, her voice trembling slightly. We condemn her hateful language in the strongest possible terms. Our son, Arland, was misguided and manipulated by an adult who should have known better. We implore the community to join us in supporting Nora Whitman's family and all those hurt by this woman's reprehensible behavior. Harland stood stiffly beside her, his face pale and drawn, barely able to meet the reporters' gazes. Whether he felt relief or humiliation was impossible to discern, but the fallout was swift and brutal. Anonymous tips began to surface, painting a damning portrait of Vivian Lockwood's shady business practices, threats made to former tenants, backroom deals with city officials, and a growing list of victims emboldened by Nora Whitman's courage. Finally, people truly listened. Vivian Lockwood's email chimed, delivering a single devastating word: termination. Immediate effect. No polite farewells, no generous severance package, just a final, ignominious expulsion from the empire she had ruled for so long. She stared at the screen, her hands shaking uncontrollably as the power, influence, and network she had so carefully cultivated vanished in a storm of hashtags and damning headlines. Her phone buzzed incessantly with angry messages, cancelled meetings, and even outright threats. In a fit of rage, she smashed it against the wall of her home office, finding herself utterly alone. The world outside remained indifferent, but within her mind, rage consumed her like a wildfire. Her face, once ubiquitous, was now a meme, a cautionary tale about the high price of cruelty. In this age of accountability, Nora Whitman, surrounded by the comforting presence of her grandmother and Steel Jack, watched the news unfold with quiet satisfaction. Walter Hayes smiled, a hint of pride softening his weathered features. "Sometimes the world catches up, kid," he said, his voice low and reassuring. "Sometimes it's slow, but it happens." Yet, in the aftermath of the public reckoning, something darker brewed. Vivian Lockwood had fallen silent, vanishing from the social scene and the news cycle, but those who knew her best sensed the danger that lurked beneath the surface, the potential for destruction that came from power lost and humiliation endured. Something was coming, something desperate and potentially catastrophic. It was well past midnight when Elena Whitmore pulled her sedan into a remote corner of a nearly deserted parking lot behind a shuttered strip mall. The flickering neon sign cast her face in a cold, uneven light, revealing eyes hollowed out by humiliation and fury. She glanced around nervously, ensuring she hadn't been followed, and checked the time again. Every minute felt like an hour since her world had begun to crumble. The air hung heavy with the stench of gasoline and stale fast food grease. Vivian Lockwood's hands trembled as she tightened her grip on her purse, double-checking the thick envelope nestled inside. She could barely believe she was about to go through with this, but the poison of rage had completely consumed her reason. A battered Lincoln crept into the lot, its headlights extinguished, the engine purring softly. 3 hulking figures emerged, their faces obscured by hoodies and caps. They moved with a practiced casualness, the kind that came from living outside the boundaries of the law. The tallest of the 3, his jaw covered in stubble and crude tattoos snaking up his neck, sized up Vivian Lockwood with a bored amusement. "Miss Foster," he drawled, his voice as flat and lifeless as the cracked concrete beneath their feet. "You sure about this?" She nodded curtly, her jaw clenched tight. "I'm paying you for a job. I want it done tonight." He cast a knowing glance at her, Then at the envelope she thrust toward him. "This is serious money. People usually want something very serious for cash like this." Vivian Lockwood's hand shook as she handed it over. "It's all there, and there's more where that came from if you do exactly what I say." The other two men exchanged a look before opening the envelope and rifling through the thick stacks of cash. "What's the job?" the leader asked, his eyes narrowed with suspicion. She reached into her bag, pulled out a folded piece of paper and handed it to him. The man glanced at the address, his brow furrowing. "You want us to rough someone up, or you want a message sent?" Vivian Lockwood's eyes narrowed, her voice dropping to a near whisper, dripping with venom. "No messages. I want that house gone. Burn it to the ground. I don't care if they're inside or not. No witnesses, no traces. Act like professionals." A hush fell over the group, even among the hardened criminals. The leader raised his eyebrows, a hint of surprise in his eyes. "You're not playing, are you?" She glared at him. "No, I want it erased tonight." He glanced at his partners, a silent conversation passing between them. "This isn't a cheap ask, lady. We're not talking about scaring someone or smashing up a car. Arson, someone could get hurt. We're looking at a lot of heat. You sure you want that?" Vivian Lockwood's lip curled in contempt. "You want the rest of the money or not? There's more where that came from if you deliver." He stared at her, assessing something invisible beneath the surface. Finally, he shrugged and stuffed the envelope into his jacket. "We'll handle it. Give us the name just so we don't light up the wrong place." She spat out the name like a curse. Nora Whitman Turner. Her grandmother's house. "Make it look like an accident if you can, but I want them both gone for good." The men remained silent, absorbing her words. The leader pulled out his phone, thumbed in the address and passed it around to his crew. The second man smirked, shaking his head in disbelief. "You got a problem?" Vivian Lockwood hissed, her patience wearing thin. He just laughed, glancing at his boss. "No problem. It's just not every day we get paid this much to start trouble on that block." The leader leaned against the Lincoln, his eyes glittering in the darkness. "You got beef with the Hells Angels, lady? Does this address mean anything to you? That's their territory. Everyone in town knows not to mess with Steel Jack's people." Vivian Lockwood froze for a split second, but quickly masked her fear with disdain. "They're just bikers. Do your job," he snorted, pushing off from the car. "We'll see what's possible. But I gotta say, most folks with sense know where the lines are. And this one?" He shook his head slowly. "This one's written in blood." She rolled her eyes, sick of the warnings. "Just call me when it's finished." As the men turned away, the leader gave a subtle signal to his crew. "Yeah, we'll be in touch." But his eyes were cold and watchful. He pulled out his phone as Vivian Lockwood strode back to her car, her nerves raw, her head spinning with equal parts hatred and relief. She sped off into the night, convinced that by morning all her problems would be reduced to smoldering ash. She never saw the leader dial a number and step into the shadows, muttering into the phone, "Steel Jack, you got a minute? There's a lady here, real desperate. Wants a certain house burned down. It's your family, man. I'm holding her for you. Thought you should know." Unaware of the trap closing around her, Vivian Lockwood drove on, blind to the consequences of her own desperation. Her hands still trembled on the wheel, but she no longer cared. For the first time in weeks, the pain in her chest felt lighter, almost electric. "Justice," she whispered, the word tasting like gasoline on her tongue. By the time she reached home, the world outside her window was silent, too silent. She poured herself a drink, her gaze fixed on the darkness, waiting for news. But what waited in the shadows was not the erasure of her enemy, but the reckoning she could never have foreseen. The old warehouse squatted on the edge of town, its corrugated iron skin rusted and scarred, windows smeared with decades of grime. The only light emanated from a single flickering bulb near the loading bay, swinging precariously in the night breeze. Vivian Lockwood's Mercedes crept down the gravel drive, its headlights cutting through the fog and shadows. She killed the engine and scanned the deserted lot. Aside from a few scattered beer bottles and the distant glint of discarded metal, it was empty. She checked her purse one last time, her fingers brushing against the cold, reassuring handle of her pistol, her heart hammered in her chest. She had burned every bridge she had ever built, but even in the darkness, she still believed herself a queen. She stepped out of the car and walked toward the warehouse, her heels clicking out a defiant rhythm on the cracked concrete. The heavy rolling door groaned as she slid it open, slipping inside. The air was thick with the sharp scent of oil, old wood, and unspoken secrets. At first, she saw no one. Then she detected movement in the shadows. Two figures waited in the gloom, their shadows stretched long against the bare walls. Steel Jack stood tall and imposing, his arms folded across his chest, his leather vest glinting in the dim light. Standing next to him was Nora Whitman, her gaze fixed and unwavering, her eyes burning brighter than the sodium bulb overhead. Vivian Lockwood's breath caught in her throat. This was not the meeting she had paid for. "You," she managed, trying to inject a sneer into her voice, but it came out hollow and weak. Steel Jack's voice was steady, almost too calm for the palpable danger in his gaze. "You wanted a war, Vivian Lockwood. Here we are. But you didn't expect to find your monsters waiting, did you?" Vivian Lockwood reached for her purse, her fingers clumsy and fumbling. "Don't you dare threaten me. I have every right to protect myself." Steel Jack took a slow, deliberate step forward. "Go ahead. But tonight you answer for every line you've crossed, every evil deed you've committed in the shadows." Footsteps echoed behind her. The gangsters she had hired stood near the door, their arms folded, their eyes fixed on Steel Jack. The leader's voice was cool and detached. "We told you, lady, some houses are off limits. You thought you could buy us, but you're not our boss." Vivian Lockwood's carefully constructed mask cracked, and unbridled rage flared in her eyes. "You were supposed to do a job." "We did," the leader replied, his voice devoid of emotion. "We kept you out of real trouble. We called the only man in town you can't pay off." She fumbled in her bag, finally pulling out the pistol and pointing it directly at Steel Jack. Her hands shook violently. "Get away from me. I swear I'll shoot." Steel Jack didn't even blink. "The cops are almost here. They know everything, every word you said, every dollar you handed over. This is your last stand." Nora Whitman stepped forward, her voice clear and unflinching, cutting through the tense atmosphere. "Look at yourself, Vivian Lockwood. You're not powerful. You're not brave. You're desperate. You tried to destroy everything we had because you thought no one could stop you. But here you are, alone, holding a gun like it's the last thing you own." Vivian Lockwood's grip tightened on the pistol. "You think you're better than me? I built this town. I ran everything. People like you were supposed to know your place." Nora Whitman met her gaze without wavering. "The only thing you ever built was a cage, one you filled with fear. But I don't belong in your cage. Neither does anyone else. Money isn't power, Vivian Lockwood. Courage is." The wail of sirens grew louder, shrieking in the distance, growing more insistent with each passing second. Red and blue lights painted the broken windows, spinning wildly against the grimy walls. Steel Jack raised his hands, his eyes never leaving Vivian Lockwood's. "This is your choice. Surrender or drag this out. But either way, tonight's the end." Vivian Lockwood let out a strangled scream and turned the gun towards Nora Whitman. "You think you've won? You think this is justice?" Nora stood her ground, refusing to flinch. "This is what you chose. All you ever wanted was to make someone smaller, to erase what you couldn't control. But you can't erase the truth. Not anymore." The warehouse door crashed open, and officers in full body armor swept in, weapons drawn. The gangster leader raised his hands in surrender. "She's the one you want. We were just bystanders." Vivian Lockwood froze, the gun trembling in her hand, her eyes wide with panic. Two officers closed in on her. "Put it down, Miss Foster. Now." She backed away, her eyes darting wildly. "No, you don't understand. She ruined everything. I'm the victim here." Steel Jack stepped aside, allowing the officers to advance. "No, Vivian Lockwood. Tonight the mask comes off." With a final shudder, Vivian Lockwood released her grip on the pistol. The officers closed in, wrenching her arms behind her back and cuffing her as she screamed, "You can't do this! I'll have your badges! I'll ruin all of you!" Her voice echoed in the emptiness of the warehouse, growing shriller with every step as she fought against her captors, helpless against the overwhelming force of the law. She spat, cursed and twisted, clinging to the last vestiges of her former power, struggling to remain the queen she once was, until the crown was ripped away and only the bitter truth remained. Nora Whitman watched, her shoulders squared, her breath steady. For the first time in a long time, she felt truly safe, not just because Vivian Lockwood was gone, but because she had faced the worst darkness imaginable and had emerged victorious. Steel Jack rested a comforting hand on her shoulder. "You did it," he said softly, not with fists, but with the truth. Outside, the sirens faded into the distance, replaced by the soft rush of wind across the empty lot. Inside the warehouse, only echoes and the quiet hum of resolve lingered. The news didn't break, it detonated. Before the first bell, the district's inbox was flooded with demands for accountability. By noon, the superintendent had called an emergency board session. By evening, Principal Miller stood beneath the harsh glare of fluorescent lights in a sterile conference room that reeked of stale coffee and palpable fear, flanked by lawyers who murmured nervously into their sleeves. On the screen behind him, damning slides rolled by, donation ledgers, suspiciously timed cash deposits following private meetings, an advisory stipend routed through a Shell booster club, and a string of emails in which Vivian Lockwood explicitly urged the reconsideration of scholarship criteria for purely cosmetic community optics. Walter Hayes sat in the front row, his demeanor composed and his resolve unwavering. When the chair recognized him, he rose with the quiet authority of a man who had buried bullies, far bigger than a high school principal. "Trust is the spine of an institution," he said evenly, his voice resonating with quiet power. "When you sell it, the whole body collapses." Miller's carefully crafted rebuttals withered under the relentless weight of the damning records and the growing number of reputations distancing themselves from him. The board voted swiftly and clinically for termination, pending criminal referral. He signed the papers with a visibly shaking hand, and security escorted him out a side door that led not back to his office, but into the unknown. Word of Miller's downfall swept through the halls the next morning like a chilling cold front. Staff members whispered in hushed tones, and students filmed the empty nameplate on the principal's door as if it were a newly discovered relic. The smug confidence that had always accompanied Owen Brooks down the corridor evaporated, leaving him exposed and vulnerable in the sudden draft of change. He still wore the jacket, another one gleaming and new, but it hung wrong on a boy who had lost the wind beneath his sails. His Scholar of Character plaque disappeared from the trophy case, replaced by a blank space and the rippling reflection of faces pressed against the glass, searching for what had once been there. Then came the letters. They arrived in embossed envelopes that made parents' hands tremble and teenagers' chests swell with pride. Except this time they were ominously thin. After careful review, in light of recent findings, we regret to inform you. The rejection from the first Ivy League school could have been dismissed as a fluke. But the second rejection made his mother sit silently at the kitchen island for a full hour, staring blankly into space. The third rejection, from the school he had toured in a tailored blazer and an air of effortless superiority, broke something quiet and essential in his father's eyes. At lunch, the tables he once ruled, as if born to their head seats, seemed to subtly edge away from him. Friends pivoted their bodies mid-conversation, letting his words fall unnoticed between their sneakers and the floor. A teacher who had once smiled indulgently at his late papers avoided his gaze altogether. In the cafeteria line, someone coughed the word bully into a napkin and then pretended to be engrossed in the menu. Ethan Cole grabbed his tray and fled. He slipped into the bathroom, locked himself in the far stall, and lowered himself onto the closed toilet lid. The harsh, fluorescent hum rattled the pipes overhead, and a draft lifted the edge of a torn poster advertising Kindness Week. He balanced his sandwich precariously on a textbook and ate with small, embarrassed bites, the way he imagined the kids he used to mock might have eaten, silent, rapid, desperate to be invisible. Footsteps entered the bathroom, followed by laughter that faltered when someone noticed his expensive shoes beneath the partition. A hushed whisper, "Is he crying?" A snort, then a guilty silence. The door swung shut, leaving him alone once more. He choked down the last bite of his sandwich and stared at the tiled wall until the grout lines blurred into a single, monotonous grey band. By Friday, his parents made a decision without consulting him. The transfer paperwork was processed with ruthless efficiency. A fresh start, his mother said, her voice devoid of emotion. "Lay low," his father added, as if reputation were nothing more than a passing storm that could be waited out. His first day at the public high school hit him like a cold slap in the face. The paint was peeling. The security guard's badge had a crack running through the number. The lockers screamed when opened. No one cared about his last name. No one asked about his car. Two boys in faded hoodies watched him shoulder his way through the crowded hallway and decided he wasn't worth the energy it would take to acknowledge him. In English class, the teacher handed him a packet of worksheets and said without a trace of irony, "Just do the work that's in front of you." At lunch, he searched desperately for an empty table, but found none. Harland found no forgiving faces, no sympathetic ears, only judgment. He retreated to the bathroom again, changing stalls as soon as one filled with another student seeking refuge. He ate his lunch in silence, but it was a different kind of silence than he was used to, a hostile, accusatory hush. The cafeteria felt even worse. A crumpled wad of paper skittered under the stall door and bumped against his shoe. He didn't kick it back. He didn't open it to see its message. He just stared at his reflection in the cold, unyielding stainless steel dispenser, desperately trying to find the boy who had once believed the world would yield to his desires if he only exerted enough pressure at Crestview. The tide had turned, the power structure reversed. Guidance counselors, once spouting the predictable platitudes of legacy and leadership, now spoke earnestly on camera about equity in access and repairing the damage done. The assembly where the scholarship decision would be rectified felt like a strange hybrid of courtroom drama and tent revival. The gym was packed, the students' faces gaunt, their eyes like flickering lanterns. Teachers lined the walls, arms crossed, striving for a neutrality that felt strained. Walter Hayes found a seat near the aisle, his presence a quiet statement of support. Steel Jack stood at the back, a quiet storm cloud looming, his cap held respectfully in his hand. Nora Whitman waited off stage, palms damp, carefully controlling her breath, finding a steady rhythm to center herself. The interim principal stepped to the microphone. He wasted no words. He spoke of the investigation, of the board's findings, of the community's demands, and of what the school should have been all along. Then he spoke Nora's name. She walked out to a sound she hadn't heard since childhood, not the frenzied whispers of gossip, not the slow, perfunctory clap of mandatory respect, but a wave. The applause rose in a clean, genuine swell, insistent and powerful, as if the room were cleansing itself. She thought of her grandmother's careful hands, smoothing a tablecloth that the HOA had deemed a violation. She thought of Vivian Lockwood's $100 bill, shimmering mockingly in a puddle of grease. She thought of Harlan's snap by the coffee pot. How insignificant that sound seemed now. The interim principal held up the envelope. The Crestview Foundation Scholarship, he announced, is restored to its rightful recipient, Nora Whitman Turner. The roar that followed was not just loud, it was warm, enveloping. Teachers who had remained silent for too long let their hands clap together harder than they intended. A junior, remembering a cruel laugh, wiped his eyes and pretended it was dust. Even the scoreboard light seemed to burn a fraction brighter for a fleeting moment. Nora Whitman accepted the folder. Her fingers trembled, not from surprise, but from the solemn weight of the moment, the acknowledgement of what had been lost and regained. She found Walter Hayes in the crowd. He nodded once, a gesture both proud and weary. She glanced toward the back. Steel Jack touched 2 fingers to his brow in a salute that conveyed more than any cheers could. After the assembly, the crowd spilled into the hallways, buzzing with a different kind of electricity, an undercurrent of hope and renewal. Posters about college fairs fluttered as students brushed past. A teacher called Nora Whitman's name, handing her a stack of makeup assignments without a trace of condescension. A freshman tentatively asked if she would help him with a history paper. She said yes to both. At last, she stepped into her classroom. The air held that fragile calm that descends after a storm has passed, leaving behind a sense of cleansed possibility. She took her seat, placed the scholarship folder on top of her notebook, and let her breath settle. Only then did she look, almost instinctively, to the far row, where a chair had always been filled with presence more than merit. It stood empty now, plain, unremarkable, just a seat without a boy to perform in it. Nora Whitman looked toward Harlan's empty chair, her gaze not filled with gloating triumph, but with a quiet, compassionate pity. The smoke from the grill curled through the air, carrying the promise of summer and a new beginning. For the first time in months, the little house at the end of Maple Street was filled with laughter, real and unguarded, rising over the music and the clinking of ice in glasses. The front yard, once a symbol of defeat and isolation, overflowed with voices and light. Old neighbors who used to turn away now stopped to chat. Biker jackets gleamed in the sun. Kids darted between picnic tables, their joyful energy infectious. Even the roses in Nora Whitman's grandmother's garden seemed to lift their heads a little higher, catching the light of a day that finally felt earned, deserved. Steel Jack stood over the grill, spatula in hand, engaged in a lively argument with another biker about the merits of Texas brisket versus Carolina pulled pork. The leather and tattoos might have suggested a rough crowd, but the easy camaraderie and genuine laughter told a different story, a gathering where everyone, for once, was welcome, accepted. On the porch, Nora's grandmother sat wrapped in her favorite crocheted shawl, her wheelchair positioned at the heart of the activity. Every few minutes someone brought her another plate or poured her a little more sweet tea, insisting she try this, taste that. The old woman's eyes glistened with unshed tears. She had lost so much, but she was home. The house was theirs again, officially, legally, untouchable. Nora Whitman moved between tables, filling drinks, offering extra napkins, hugging a classmate who had once been too intimidated to speak to her. The weight she'd carried for so long had lightened, replaced by a gentler kind of responsibility, a sense of belonging, and a desire to nurture the newfound community. She glanced toward the garage, where a cluster of teenagers admired Steel Jack's Harley and smiled at the sight of a future built on curiosity and connection, not fear and exclusion. At a corner table under the largest oak tree, Walter Hayes sat with his tie loosened and a can of cold beer in hand, looking profoundly content. Steel Jack joined him, and the two old warriors exchanged a silent toast, a recognition of battles fought and justice hard won. Their conversation drifted between shared memories and wry jokes, pausing only when a young child came by to ask if they really used to ride together like in a movie. Walter Hayes winked. Steel Jack ruffled the child's hair. "Something like that, kid. But the real heroes aren't always the loudest." As the afternoon faded into evening, more neighbors arrived, drawn by the music and the murmur of happy voices. Single mothers with casseroles, old men with folding chairs, students in borrowed shirts and shoes, a tapestry of lives interwoven. For the first time, nobody worried about who belonged. The lines between us and them blurred and then vanished altogether, washed away by the warmth of the fire pit and the shared satisfaction of a good meal enjoyed in good company. Nora Whitman watched it all, her heart swelling with gratitude. She caught herself thinking of her father, his old leather jacket, now hers, hanging by the door. She remembered the nights he'd come home smelling of diesel and sweat, his hands rough but gentle as he taught her to always stand tall and to make room for others. Tonight, those words finally resonated with a deeper, more profound meaning. Justice was not just about punishment or retribution. It was about making space for kindness, for second chances, for community, for belonging. She stepped onto the porch to find her grandmother smiling through tears, her hand resting on Nora Whitman's wrist. "You brought us all together, child," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "You did it with your heart, not your fists." Nora Whitman leaned in, resting her head on her grandmother's shoulder. "I had help," she said, her eyes sweeping over the crowd. Steel Jack pouring lemonade for a nervous neighbor. Walter Hayes patiently explaining the finer points of chess to a boy who had never played. Bikers and townsfolk standing side by side, sharing stories that grew increasingly outlandish with each telling. As dusk deepened, as the sky darkened, someone brought out an old guitar. A biker picked a bluesy tune. A teenager tentatively joined in, hesitant but bold. Soon voices lifted, some in harmony, others off-key, but no one seemed to care. The music became a current running through them all, stitching together a tapestry of resilience as the first stars pricked the velvet sky. Steel Jack tapped a glass for silence. "Tonight," he announced, his voice rough with emotion, "we celebrate not just Nora, but everyone here who decided to do the right thing, even when it was hard, even when it meant standing alone. Justice isn't a one-time thing. It's every day we choose to help instead of harm." Walter Hayes raised his can in a toast. "To second chances," he declared, "and to those brave enough to take them." Glasses clinked in agreement. Nora Whitman stood, slipping her arms into her father's jacket. The leather was worn soft by time and memory. Its weight felt both grounding and freeing, a tangible link to her past and a symbol of her future. Steel Jack wheeled her grandmother to the curb, then looked at Nora Whitman with a proud, almost paternal smile. "Well," he said, his eyes twinkling in the twilight, "you ready for the next ride?" She nodded, her heart soaring. "Let's go." Nora Whitman swung her leg over the back of the Harley, the jacket swallowing her frame but fitting her soul perfectly. Steel Jack revved the engine, the sound echoing through the street, drawing tears and applause from the assembled crowd. Her grandmother waved, wiping at her eyes. Walter Hayes saluted, laughter in his eyes. As they rolled out of the driveway, Nora Whitman's arms tight around Steel Jack's waist. The world felt wide open before them, full of possibility. The little house glowed with the warmth of a new legacy, a testament to the power of community and courage. No more fear, no more shrinking, just the simple, powerful truth of belonging. They rode toward the future, not just for Nora, but for everyone who had been told to know their place and had found the courage at last to claim a seat at the table. Justice, Nora realized, might arrive late. It might stumble, crawl, and fight for breath. But as long as there was hope and people willing to stand up, it would always find its way home. Justice may be late, but it always finds its way home if we don't give up. And as this story comes to a quiet close, we're reminded that courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes it simply refuses to bow. Thank you for staying with this journey until the very end. If this story touched you, moved you, or made you see the world a little differently, please consider subscribing to Heart Tales so you don't miss the next story we share. I'd love to hear from you. What moment stayed with you the longest, or what would you have done in her place? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And when you're ready, continue watching the stories waiting for you on the end screen. Thank you for being part of the Heart Tales family.